In the cold silence of a dying galaxy, most civilizations learn to accept the inevitable. They calculate survival in percentages and measure mercy in logistical costs. But deep within the radiation storms of the Narath gas giant, a forgotten fortress is about to discover that humanity does not play by the rules of logic. When a species that treats distress calls as sacred debts arrives at a slaughter, the laws of physics and the certainty of death are rewritten in fire. Welcome to Zenith Imperium. Stay until the end to witness the true cost of defiance, and subscribe now to join our odyssey through the dark. Commander Salis Van had stopped counting the dead 2 hours ago, for the numbers had become a form of psychological debris she could no longer afford to carry. Bastion Kepri, once a soaring achievement of Illyri architecture, a citadel of curved shield glass and amber light anchored within the shattered inner rings of the gas giant Narath, was now a hollowed-out carcass. It was no longer a place of refuge, it was a target. Half of its outer armor had been stripped away, 3 residential sectors burned without flame in the vacuum, and every tactical display in the command well glowed in some terminal variation of red. Salis stood at the center of the trench, her primary wing folded tight and her cloak torn, watching the enemy formation close around the station like a slow-motion fist. The Draxon Ascendancy had not come to conquer territory. They had come to eliminate a retreat. In the command pit, Tactical Officer Relin touched his console with fingers that trembled like thin glass. "Primary barrier at 14%, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the groaning of the station's superstructure. "The harmonic stabilizers are failing. If the next volley hits the ventral spine, the gravity well will collapse. We won't even need the Draxon to kill us. The planet will simply swallow us whole." Salis closed her inner eyelids to contain the rising sting of grief. The air in the command well was metallic and thin, smelling of scorched insulation and the recycled breath of thousands. "And the medical decks?" Salis asked, her voice sounding foreign. Too calm, too practiced. "They are treating the wounded in the dark," a voice crackled over the comms. It was Chief Surgeon Avara. "We've diverted all power to the surgical arrays, but the atmosphere is freezing. The patients are shivering on the tables, Salis. If I don't get a power guarantee in 20 minutes, the neonatal ward goes silent. Tell me something good, please." Salis stared at the tactical sphere. 12 Draxon assault hulls hovered outside the breach in the rings. Black, angular, and patient. That patience was more sickening than rage. A vengeful enemy made mistakes, but a patient enemy simply waited for the laws of thermodynamics to finish the job. 43,000 civilians were trapped inside Kepri. Families, transport crews, children from the frontier moons who had come here believing the fortress would hold long enough for a rescue that would never arrive. The nearest Allied task force had been pulverized 3 days ago at the Oris Gate. The galaxy had looked at the math of Bastion Kepri and decided the survivors weren't worth the risk. Suddenly, the command speakers hissed with a sterile, machine-translated voice. "Archon Krelvar, of the Ascendancy. Refuge Fortress Kepri. Your resistance is no longer militarily relevant. Power down your remaining weapons. Open the civilian containment decks. Preservation processing will begin immediately. Further delay only increases waste." "Preservation processing," Relin choked out. Everyone knew the term. It was how the Draxon described rendering biological populations into labor stock, fuel, or nutrients. To the Ascendancy, a person was just unrefined material. Salis leaned toward the command pickup, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No." There was a pause, a brief gap of static. "You are refusing survival," Krelvar returned with sterile certainty. "I am refusing you," Salis replied, and she cut the channel before he could respond. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that only forms when everyone knows the truth, but no longer has the strength to speak it. Tarrell, her second in command, stepped up from the lower weapons rail. His wing was bandaged in blood-soaked gauze. "They are charging their spinal lances," he said, nodding toward the displays. "Salis, if we're going to do it, we do it now." The archaic band. Salis looked at the emergency panel, where a brass-covered transmitter lay under decades of dust. It was built for a doctrine the modern galaxy considered a myth, the legacy distress band, the one meant for the humans. No one has heard a response on that frequency in 50 years, Tyrell. Humans are isolationists. They don't fight other people's wars. The stories say they don't care about the war, Tyrell countered, his eyes burning with a desperate light. They care about the debt. They treat a distress call as a debt. We are already dead, Salis. What do we have to lose but the silence? Salis looked at the monitors showing mothers clutching their children in the dark vaults. She reached out and flipped the safety cover on the brass transmitter. "Open the archaic band," she commanded. "All frequencies. Legacy distress law. Let the void hear us one last time." The old transmitter did not hum with the elegant, silent power of modern pulse arrays. It clicked, a dry, mechanical sound from a brass switch older than the nations currently dying in this sector. It was followed by a low, rhythmic carrier tone that seemed too small and too fragile to matter against 12 Draxon assault hulls. Relin looked almost embarrassed as the signal rolled out. "Legacy distress packet is away," he reported. "It's routing through every dead relay the system remembers." Salis kept her hand on the transmitter key, as if her own warmth could carry the signal through the vacuum. On the central display, nothing changed. The Draxon remained patient black spearheads against the pale, churning storm bands of Nareth. Their batteries stayed hot. Their confidence did not crack. Relin finally cleared his throat. "Commander, if anyone does monitor that frequency, they could be weeks out." Salis nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the darkness. "I know." He hesitated. "Then why send it?" Salis looked at the faint amber lamp still glowing above the transmitter. "Because if this is the end, I would rather meet it having asked the universe one last time whether decency still exists." No one told her that commanders were supposed to speak in cleaner words. Another tremor passed through Bastion Kepri, more violent than the last. Habitat Ring 2 lost pressure seals in 3 compartments. A triage station went down to emergency manual ventilation. A cluster of civilian life signs blinked out. Then the speakers opened again, and Archon Krelvar's voice returned. "Your transmission has been observed. You are calling on extinct protocols and absent powers. This is irrational behavior." Salis lifted her head. "And yet, you interrupted your attack just to comment on it." There was a faint pause, tiny but real. "Hope prolongs disorder," Krelvar replied. "We prefer our subjects to be efficient." Salis almost answered, but Relin made a sharp sound. "Commander," he whispered, "there's a return ping." Every head in the command well turned. Relin's upper hands were flying over the console. "No, wait. Not a ping. A handshake acknowledgement. Old rescue code. Human formatted." The word human moved through the room like something too dangerous to believe. Most of Kepri knew the rumors, patrols that crossed dead sectors because someone had once charted them as civilian lanes, cargo captains who carried weapons too large for their hulls. Frontier superstition. Salis did not allow hope to take shape. "Source?" she demanded. Relin swallowed hard. "Outside the system edge. Negative correction. They're just inside it now. Fast. Commander, whatever acknowledged us did not enter through a standard jump lane." The tactical sphere rippled. For one breath, it showed nothing. Then, a hard white icon cut into existence far beyond the battle line, too sharp and too close for anything that size to have emerged cleanly. It was only one ship. Long, predatory, with an armored spine and asymmetrical heat baffles like hooked teeth. "Unknown vessel," Relin said. "Mass reading inconsistent. It's accelerating." Tyrell leaned over the rail. "Toward us or the Draxon?" The Draxon had seen it too. Their outer picket reoriented at once, 2 assault hulls turning to intercept. Krelvar's channel opened again, but this time there was the faintest edge of irritation. "Unidentified vessel. This combat zone is under lawful ascendancy enforcement. Alter course or be destroyed." The answer did not come from the Draxon. It came through the obsolete rescue band, routed directly into Kepri's command well, with enough signal strength to override the dead speakers. The voice was human, rough, steady, and carrying the kind of calm that only exists on the far side of a decision already made. Refuge Fortress Kepri. This is HNS Resolute Black, a deep-range emergency response cruiser. Your beacon was received and authenticated under Legacy Rescue Doctrine. There was background noise, the hum of heavy consoles, the rhythmic thud of boots. Not panic, readiness. Commander on frequency, the human continued. This is Captain Rowan Hale. We are entering your battle space now. Recommend all non-essential personnel get low and stay away from external hull sections. Relin made a helpless sound. Terrell just stared at the display where the white icon was driving straight through the interception line without slowing. One ship, Terrell said, almost offended. Salis keyed the return channel. Captain Hale, be advised, there are 12 Draxon assault hulls in attack posture. A beat. Acknowledged, the human said. We counted. Then you understand the situation, Salis pressed. Then, with an infuriating, beautiful calm, Hale spoke. Yes, Commander. Your people are under protection now. The words hit the room harder than any promise of a fleet. Under protection, not we will try. A statement absolute, delivered by one ship already burning toward 12 enemy hulls, as if the odds were merely an administrative detail. Outside, the first 2 Draxon interceptors opened fire, plasma lashing toward the incoming ship. The Resolute Black did not break. It rolled hard, cutting between the barrage on a vector so violent the command well gasped, and came howling through the opening in a burst of engine light. It did not fly like any warship Salis had seen. It came in like a deliberate act of refusal. Its drive signature flared, vanished, and reappeared in pulses that should have torn lesser craft apart. The first Draxon fired too early, the second too late. The human ship slipped between them with calculated violence. On the central sphere, the human ship knifed past the lead interceptor so close that the 2 icons nearly merged into a single flare. Then, a new bloom erupted from the Resolute Black's broadside ports. Not plasma, not lances. Dense kinetic signatures, superheated and accelerating under coil force, punched through the interceptor's forward armor like it was built of paper. The Draxon ship didn't explode cleanly. It came apart in layers, its reactor housing blowing sideways into a spray of white-hot shards. The second interceptor tried to roll clear, but the human warship dived beneath it and fired a needle of coherent light that split the engine cluster, opening the vessel from ventral plate to command tower in one continuous incision. Silence filled the command well, broken only by the disbelieving prayer clicks of the crew. The Resolute Black did not pause. It was already angling toward the main siege ring. Captain Hale, Salis said, her voice trembling, you're entering concentrated fire. The human's voice returned, steady beneath the thunder of his own bridge. That's the idea, Commander. We need them looking at us and not your wounded sectors. A second female voice cut through behind him. Port batteries green. We've got a clean lane. Hale didn't mute the bridge chatter. He didn't seem to care if strangers heard how his ship fought. Take it, he said, and tell engineering I want another 20% out of the dorsal shield stack. No species Salis knew spoke during battle like that. The human sounded focused, but beneath it was a hard familiarity with danger that made the impossible feel routine. Outside, the 6 nearest Draxon hulls pivoted in unison and opened fire. The void around the Resolute Black disappeared inside a barrage of plasma and shield-buster darts. Relin made a strangled sound, but the human ship came out the other side still moving. Its shields were visible now, not as a smooth shell, but as layered geometric plates that absorbed and redistributed hits with a localized ferocity. That shield architecture isn't efficient, Terrell said, baffled. It's aggressive. Captain Hale's voice returned, clipped. Kepri, we're going to break their circle at your port fracture. When we do, I need every functioning point defense mount on your station to fire outward on my mark. Can you give me that? Salis turned to her fire control officer. 31 turret clusters still answer, the officer replied. Tracking is bad, but we can fire. Salis keyed the channel. We can fire. Good, Hale said. Stay with me. The Resolute Black pitched nose down, accelerating straight toward the heaviest Draxon formation. 2 assault hulls tried to box it in, but Hale made the trap smaller. The human vessel cut thrust abruptly, rolled through its own momentum, and pivoted broadside between the warships. Missile pods opened, not for saturation, but for surgical strikes. 8 compact signatures hit the enemy's weapon nodes and shield regulators. 1 Draxon vessel lost its gun decks. The other lost steering and rolled helplessly into its sibling. Both drifted directly into the path of the Resolute Black's forward spinal cannon. Salis only saw the aftermath. A tunnel of absence punched through overlapping armor and a bloom of debris. Now, Hale said. Salis slammed her palm onto the rail. Fire! Bastion Kepri answered with everything it had. Turrets spat flak and beams through the gap the humans had carved. They didn't need to kill. They only needed to widen the panic. The Draxon line faltered. For the first time, the enemy had to think about 2 threats. The Resolute Black surged through the opening, slamming into the inner siege lane and dismantling the machinery of massacre. Engines first, then command relays. Salis watched a Draxon carrier blossom into spinning metal, and for the first time, she felt hope sharpened into anger. As the Resolute Black carved through the ring, 2 armored docking spines unfolded and latched onto Kepri's shattered frame with a thud that shook the well. The human ship was actively bracing the station, feeding power into collapsed support nodes and locking mass anchors into fractured beams. They're stabilizing us while still fighting, Relin whispered. Hale's voice came through again. Commander, I'm sending 3 teams across, medical, engineering, and corridor security. They'll have beacon transponders. Anything without a beacon is not ours. Salis turned. Route them to the surgical decks and refugee vaults. Already planned, Hale said. Also, one more thing. Your enemy is about to realize they're losing the witness. If they try anything desperate, it'll be against your civilians. Keep your internal routes locked. The line cut. He had moved on to the next task. The first humans came through Dock Brace 7 in less than 2 minutes, figures in storm metal combat gear moving with the compact violence of predators. The leader pulled off a helm, revealing dark skin slick with sweat. Commander Salis Van? I'm Commander Naomi Price, Chief Medical Officer. My teams are headed for your surgery stacks. Anyone still breathing stays breathing. That's the doctrine. Beside her stood a taller human, Lieutenant Amir Kawari of Emergency Engineering. He took in the warped floor and exposed conduits with one sweep. Whoever kept this place together didn't do it politely, he said. Tarrell answered dryly, We lack the luxury. Kawari grinned. Good. We fix ugly just fine. They spread into the fortress like water. Salis realized the most frightening thing about humans wasn't how they destroyed, but how naturally they committed themselves once they decided something must be saved. For the next hour, Bastion Kepri became a place split between slaughter outside and relentless repair within. Human medical teams moved into the surgery decks, working beside Illyri physicians without waiting for protocols. Salis watched a feed as Price knelt beside Chief Surgeon Avara over a refugee child with silver blood in its lungs. You know the anatomy. I know pressure trauma, Price said. We do this together. The child lived. In another sector, Kawari's engineers cut open dead wall panels, bypassing burned distribution nodes to drag life support back into frozen corridors using power tapped directly from the Resolute Black's reactor. They didn't care that the cabling looked crude. They only cared that doors opened before someone suffocated. A red-haired human engineer crouched beside an Illyri apprentice who was apologizing for the state of the conduit maps. Stop saying sorry, the human snapped. The station is shot to pieces, your people are bleeding, and you're still here handing me the right tools. That makes you useful. Keep being useful. The apprentice straightened and worked faster. Salis realized these humans weren't comforting her people as victims. They were treating them as fellow survivors. It did more for morale than any speech could have. She found Hale only once during those brutal minutes when the bridge feed flashed open. He was strapped into his chair, lit by weapons fire. Status? he asked, as if they were already part of the same chain of command. Medical decks are stabilizing, Salis answered. Life support is returning to 4 sectors. Your people are... She searched for the word. They are changing the outcome, Hale finished. Then his gaze sharpened. Good, because the Draxon are winding up for something ugly. They've stopped trying to retake the siege ring. They're massing for a converging strike on your refugee vaults, boarding torpedoes. They know they can't beat us in open space, so they'll try to turn your civilians into leverage. The alert hit 6 seconds later. Internal sensors picked up 4 impact signatures along the lower refuge spine beneath Vault C, exactly where 30,000 civilians were packed behind prayer-thin bulkheads. The command well seemed to inhale as one organism. Salis was moving before her name was called. The fortress was still alive, but the enemy had just aimed for its heart. Over every channel, human and Illyri voices clashed. Security teams to Vault C, seal lower access. And cutting through the chaos, calm as iron, Hale's voice. The enemy just made this personal. Hold your civilians. We're coming down to meet them. The first boarding torpedo punched into the lower spine hard enough to throw Salis against a wall, filling the air with the scream of ruptured braces. The second hit 3 decks below. The third buried itself beside the vault's outer arch and stayed quiet, which frightened Salis more. Draxon devices only stayed quiet when they were about to do something worse than explode. She and Tarrell reached the lower junction as blast shutters slammed down. Refuge officers herded terrified families toward inner locks. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, gunfire had begun. Sharp human bursts and the heavy hammering of Draxon breaching tools. "Report," Salis snapped. A lieutenant with silver blood smeared across his face spun toward her. 3 torpedoes confirmed. They're trying to reach the vault from underneath, but the 3rd torpedo is scrambling our sensors. Salis looked at the display. The lower grid was a blur of static. The Draxon had stopped acting like conquerors and started acting like butchers. Hale's voice came over the net. "Salis, don't let them drive you into a fixed defense. They want you bunching at the doors while they hit service routes. I've got Marines cutting in from Dock Brace 7. Hold the line." The first human Marines reached the junction at a dead run. 5 figures in black rescue armor scarred by fresh impacts. Their leader, a broad woman with a scar across one eyebrow, dropped to a knee and yanked a tactical map from the static. "Gunnery Sergeant Imani Okafor," she said without looking up. "Which way to your maintenance cross space?" The lieutenant pointed with a shaking wing. "That corridor dead ends into filtration, then drops 2 levels." "Good." Okafor rose. "Torres, with me. Pell, lock this junction." "Van," she said, glancing at Salis. "Your people know these corridors better than mine. I need guides who can keep running under fire." Terrell stepped forward. "You have one." Salis caught his arm. "Your wound. It can still kill the correct species," he said. Okafor gave one approving nod. "That'll do." They moved before the moment could grow sentimental. Salis fell in with the rear group. They cut through passages narrow enough that human armor scraped the walls, past flooded conduit bays, and descended into the maintenance guts where the air smelled of burned metal. Then the first Draxon kill drone found them. It came out of a vent like a thrown blade, 6-jointed and low. Avery, a Marine, saw it a fraction before it leapt and put 3 rounds through it so fast they sounded like one. The machine burst in a spray of black shards. "More coming," Pell said. He sounded bored. Salis realized the humans were settled into the work as if chaos were a weather pattern they knew how to walk through. They reached the filtration bend and found the Draxon already there. 2 boarders were cutting through a pressure door while another laid shaped charges around a support truss. If that truss went, the vault ceiling would collapse. 30,000 would die in seconds. "On me," Okafor whispered. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Avery dropped the rear boarder before it turned. Tarrell put a pulse round through the charge layer's throat. Okafor and Torres hit the cutters head-on, using motion instead of mass, driving a combat blade through a jawline gap while trapping a weapon arm. When it was done, the corridor smelled of ozone. "Disarm those charges," Salis ordered. Kawori's engineers arrived with a portable field cage. "Tell me the bad news first," Kawori said. Salis pointed up. "If that goes, they all die." He grimaced. "Good thing I hate being told no." Kawori and two Illyri technicians fell on the truss together, their hands a blur of motion as they stripped away the Draxon charges and replaced them with a woven web of human brace foam and tension rods. The support held, but before the air could leave Salis's lungs, Relin's voice broke across the net from the command well above. "Commander, the remaining Draxon flagship is moving. It's not retreating. It's turning directly toward the refuge spine. Power spike in the forward lance. They're going to burn through the station and take the vault with it." Salis froze. Every deck plan in her mind lit up at once. If the flagship fired on that line, nothing inside the lower refuge chambers would survive the thermal bloom. Hale came on the net immediately, and for the first time, his calm carried a razor-edged bite. "All hands, this is Resolute Black actual. We're breaking dock to intercept. Corridor teams, hold where you are. Nobody falls back." "Hale, if you detach now, Kepri loses structural support," Salis shouted. "If I don't," Hale replied, "your civilians lose existence." There was no answer to that. Around her, humans and Illyri alike turned toward the outer hull as they felt the massive warship unlatching from the wounded fortress. The whole station groaned, a deep, metallic scream of protesting metal as the borrowed support vanished. But Kawori's ugly web of foam and rods held. In the well above, Relin's voice was a jagged thread. "Resolute Black has broken dock. Draxon flagship charging. Firing solution in 60 seconds. Outside, visible through a cracked maintenance viewport, the battle narrowed into a single, terrible line. The Draxon command vessel, massive, angular, and scarred, was turning its prow toward Kepri. The Resolute Black was smaller by half and bleeding shield plasma from a dozen hull breaches, but it came in like a predatory ghost, its drive wake tearing silver scars through the dark. It wasn't trying to outmass the enemy. It was trying to arrive exactly where it would hurt most. "Resolute Black shields at 30%, Relin read out, his voice trembling. "They're overdriving the reactor. They're pushing past safe limits." Salis thought of Hale's voice, unconcerned while promising murder to a ship twice his size. "Humans seem to dislike safe limits," she whispered. The Draxon flagship fired. The lance crossed the void in a beam so bright it burned afterimages into Salis's retinas. Hale didn't try to outrun it. The Resolute Black rolled directly into the shot, its shields flaring into layered plates that shattered outward under the impact. For one impossible instant, the human ship disappeared inside a star. Then it came out the other side, trailing molten armor and with one dorsal fin gone, but still accelerating. "No ship survives that," an Illyri tech whispered. Kawori, hands black with sealant, didn't look up. "Ours do when they're angry," he said. On the net, Hale's voice returned, rough and carrying the sound of physical pain. "Kepri, brace for debris. I'm taking this bastard close." He cut thrust so violently the Resolute Black seemed to fall forward in space, knifed under the flagship's main line, and slammed a concentrated burst of relativistic slugs into the giant vessel's shield emitters at point-blank range. The Draxon flagship staggered in the vacuum as half its grid collapsed. Hale didn't use the opening to flee. He drove straight into it. Inside the station, the last of the boarders chose that moment to break. Perhaps they felt their flagship falter, or perhaps they simply discovered that humans became even more dangerous when civilians were behind them. Two Draxon shock troops crashed into the filtration bend with blades lit. Okafor met the first like a door slammed by God, shoulder low, rifle empty, combat knife in hand. Tarrell shot the second through the eye seam. Salis caught sight of a strayed charge pack blinking live beneath a support lattice. She moved before she could think, tearing it free and hurling it down an auxiliary shaft just as it armed. The blast hit 3 decks below. The truss held. Around them, humans and Illyri moved like one machine, synchronized by the understanding that if one line failed, thousands died. "Impact event on the flagship," Relin shouted. The displays flared. The Resolute Black had driven itself under the Draxon warship's wounded shield plane and latched there with magnetic harpoons, pinning itself to the larger hull like a predator refusing to let go. Secondary batteries from both ships were firing so close that their light blurred together. Then, in one savage act, the human cruiser vented its remaining dorsal missile tubes directly into the flagship's exposed lance assembly and kicked its engines to full while still attached. The enemy warship's bow tore sideways. Its overcharged lance misfired into its own forward spine. What followed was a collapse of certainty. The flagship folded inward around the white core of its own weapon and came apart in a cloud of incandescent wreckage. Shockwaves hammered wide of Kepri because hail had dragged the dying ship off the firing line before finishing it. The command net went silent. Then Relin began to laugh and sob simultaneously. "The flagship is gone, Commander, the Draxon. They are breaking. They are running." The surviving enemy ships were indeed fleeing, and beyond the destruction, more contact surged onto the long-range sweep. A wall of them. Human drive signatures emerging from dark space in rhythmic intervals. 30 ships, perhaps more. Salis leaned against the ruined wall and took her first full breath in hours. Hale's face reappeared on the net. Bruised, exhausted, lit by emergency red, but alive. "Kepri," he said, "you are secure." "My engineers say your fortress is ugly but recoverable," Kawari shouted from below. "It's great news, sir." A ghost of a smile touched Hale's lips. "Commander Salis, I'm keeping a gun line over you until the last civilian is moved. The galaxy might have forgotten you, but the Resolute doesn't." Salis looked at the human marines helping her people up and finally understood the whispers. Humanity's greatest terror wasn't their weapons. It was the fact that once they decided your life mattered, they fought as if the universe itself were the contract. As the adrenaline of the final explosion began to drain from the command well, the true cost of the victory made itself known. Bastion Kepri was no longer under fire, but it was dying from within. The structural resonance from the flagship's demise had turned microfractures into gaping wounds. "Commander," Relin's voice was urgent, "the gravity stabilizers in Habitat Ring 2 are redlining. If they blow, the kinetic feedback will tear the refuge vaults off the station's spine. We have 30,000 people in those vaults who survived the Draxon only to fall into the gas giant." Salis didn't hesitate. She looked at Okafor, who was already checking the seals on her scorched armor. "Okafor, your teams are the only ones with the kinetic gear to brace those stabilizers. My people are exhausted." Okafor nodded to her team, her face set in that grim human mask of determination. "We're already moving, Commander. Kawari, get your welding rigs to the subdeck. We're going to glue this station back together if we have to use our own bones to do it." The descent into the subdecks was a journey through a nightmare. The gravity was fluctuating wildly. One moment Salis felt like she was being crushed into the deck. The next, she was floating in a soup of vented coolant and floating debris. "Stay close to the rails," Kawari shouted over the roar of the venting atmosphere. They reached the stabilizer chamber to find the massive, rotating rings glowing a hateful, pulsating violet. The shielding had melted, exposing the raw energy of the station's heart. "The manual override is fused," an Illyri technician screamed, pointing to a lever encased in slagged metal. "Step aside," Okafor commanded. She didn't use a tool. She braced her armored feet against the bulkhead, grabbed the molten lever with her thermal-shielded gauntlets, and roared. It wasn't a tactical command. It was a primal sound of defiance. The metal shrieked, protested, and finally gave way. The violet glow faded into a dull amber. The vibration that had been threatening to tear the station apart smoothed into a low, steady hum. Okafor slumped against the wall, her gauntlets smoking. "Ugly but recoverable," she wheezed, looking at Salis. "I think I'm starting to like your technical terms." Above them, the relief was palpable. The first human medical transports were already docking at the upper rings. These weren't warships. They were massive, white-hulled vessels marked with the ancient symbols of healing. Salis watched the monitors as human medics in specialized trauma suits poured into the surgical decks. They didn't ask about rank or species. They moved with a terrifying, beautiful efficiency, triage teams fanning out through the triage centers like a white tide. "Commander Van," a new voice came over the station-wide frequency. It was Admiral Vance from the Perseus Task Group, now officially in system. "We are establishing a 3-tiered security cordon. No Draxon remnant will get within a light second of this station. My heavy tugs are moving into position to tow your habitat rings into a stable orbit. You are no longer alone." Salis stood in the center of her broken command well, looking at the faces of her crew. They were covered in soot and silver blood, but for the first time in generations, they weren't looking at the floor. They were looking at the screens, at the wall of human ships surrounding them. "Admiral," Salis replied, her voice finally breaking, "the people of Bastion Kepri thank you. We didn't think anyone was listening." "We're always listening, Commander," Vance said. "That's the debt. Now let's get your people fed and your station fixed. We've got a lot of work to do." As the first groups of civilians began to emerge from the vaults, the atmosphere in the station changed. The silence of the condemned was replaced by a humming, chaotic energy. Salis walked through the central plaza, watching a human marine share his rations with a group of Illyri children. The soldier was laughing, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to push back the lingering shadows of the siege. She found Captain Hale on the observation deck of the Resolute Black, which was still clamped to the station like a loyal hound. He looked different without the tactical display lighting his face. Just a man, tired and scarred, holding a cup of steaming liquid. "It's coffee," he said, handing her a second cup. "It's bitter, it's hot, and it's the only reason I'm still standing." Salis took a sip. It was aggressive, much like the humans themselves. "Captain," she said, looking out at the Narath rings, "the galaxy told us you were myths, that the rescue doctrine was a relic of a primitive age." Hale looked at the stars, his eyes reflecting the distant lights of his fleet. "The galaxy likes to forget things that are inconvenient, Salis. Like the fact that someone has to hold the line when the math doesn't add up. We didn't come here because it was logical. We came because you called." He turned to her, his expression softening for the first time. "And as long as there's a human ship in the void, that call will always be answered. That's the only law that matters." In the days following the battle, Bastion Kepri transitioned from a tomb into a construction site of galactic proportions. The ugly but recoverable station was now a mosaic of Illyri elegance and human grit. Massive carbon fiber support beams, marked with the industrial stamps of Earth's orbital shipyards, ran alongside the ancient stonework. The air, once stale with the scent of death, now carried the sharp, clean smell of high-grade filters and the aromatic spices of shared communal kitchens. Commander Salis Van stood on a newly reinforced observation balcony overlooking the central plaza. Below, the sight was surreal. A column of Illyri scholars walked side by side with human relief workers, exchanging data pads and gestures of greeting. The 43,000 survivors were no longer displaced populations. They were the citizens of a new era. "Looking at the progress, or just checking if the rings are still there?" a voice asked. It was Captain Hale. He had become a constant presence, a steady anchor in the station's reconstruction. "I was thinking about the word obsolete," Salis replied. "The Draxon told us our resistance was obsolete. They said your rescue protocols were extinct. They believed the universe had moved past the need for empathy." Hale stepped up to the rail. "People like the Draxon always mistake silence for extinction. They think that because they stopped listening, the signals stopped being sent. But the thing about humanity, Salis, is that we're very good at keeping old fires burning, even when everyone else has forgotten why they were lit in the first place." The peace was broken by a signal on Salis's wristcom. It was Relin, now promoted to Chief of Communications. "Commander, sorry to interrupt, but we're receiving a wideband transmission from the Oris Gate. It's the Perseus Task Group. Admiral Vance says the border is secure, but they've found something unexpected." Salis and Hale moved to the nearby tactical terminal. The holographic display shimmered into life, showing a grainy feed from the edge of the system. In the debris of a former Draxon supply depot, the human sensors had picked up a cluster of escape pods. They weren't Draxon. They were Kalo, a species the Illyri thought had been wiped out decades ago. They heard the broadcast, Hale whispered, his eyes narrowing as he read the sensor data. Vance's message didn't just reach the Draxon, it bounced off every dead moon in the quadrant. These survivors have been hiding in the dark for 20 years, waiting for a reason to come out. Salis felt a chill of realization. The rescue of Bastion Kepri wasn't just a single event, it was a catalyst. The legacy rescue doctrine was acting like a beacon, drawing the ghosts of the galaxy back into the light. "If we bring them here," Salis said, "the Draxon will see it as a provocation." Hale looked at her, his expression hardening into that iron-clad resolve. "Let them see it. We didn't come here to play hide-and-seek, Commander. We came here to set a standard. If the Kalo are out there, we bring them in. If the Draxon want to stop us, they'll have to go through a human gun line to do it." "He's right," another voice added. Sergeant Okafor stood behind them, her armor cleaned but still bearing deep scratches. "We've already got the medical tents ready, and Miller, the engineer who woke up yesterday, he's already complaining that he doesn't have enough work to do. He'll want to help." Salis looked from the Marine to the captain, then down at the thousands of people thriving below. She realized that the limits they were ignoring today were the limits of history itself. They were refusing to let the past dictate the future. "Relin," Salis spoke into the comms, "tell Admiral Vance to facilitate the transfer. Bastion Kepri is officially declaring itself a free sanctuary. All legacy distress signals are to be prioritized. We will house whoever comes." "Understood, Commander," Relin replied, his voice brimming with pride. "Sending the handshake now." As the orders went out, the Resolute Black, still docked to the outer frame, began to cycle its engines. The deep, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the floorboards, a heartbeat for the station. It was a reminder that the protection Hale had promised wasn't a temporary gift. It was a permanent vow. Hale turned to Salis, a rare smile breaking through his fatigue. "You're getting the hang of this, you know, making the galaxy a smaller, louder place." "I learned from the best," Salis said, watching the first long-range human shuttle depart to meet the survivors. "And, Captain, thank you, not for the ships, but for reminding us that the void only wins if you stop calling back." The sun of Nareth began to set behind the gas giant, casting long golden shadows. In the distance, more white icons appeared on the scanners. More human ships, more allies, more voices joining the chorus. The night was coming, but for the first time in generations, the inhabitants of Bastion Kepri weren't afraid of the dark. They knew the Resolute were watching, and the signal was still strong. The arrival of the Kalo survivors was the final proof that the silence of the galaxy had been a choice, not a necessity. As the first group of refugees stepped off the human shuttles into the main docking bay of Bastion Kepri, the air was thick with an emotion that defied translation. These were a people who had lived in the shadows of asteroid belts for 2 decades, breathing recycled air and speaking in whispers, convinced that the rest of the universe had either died or moved on. To see them emerge into the light, their pale eyes blinking in the glow of human floodlights, was to witness a resurrection. Commander Salis Van stood on the arrival platform alongside Captain Hale. She watched as an elderly Kalo woman reached out with a trembling hand to touch the metal hull of the human shuttle. The woman wasn't looking for a weapon or a symbol of power. She was looking for reality, the cold, hard proof that the rescue was not a dream. Beside her, Sergeant Okafor was lifting a Kalo child whose hollow cheeks spoke of years of starvation. The sergeant didn't say a word. She simply handed the child a piece of fruit and a warm blanket, her movements as careful as if she were handling the station's core. "They look like we did," Salis whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the medical drones. "Like ghosts who forgot they were supposed to leave." Hale nodded, his gaze fixed on the line of new arrivals. "That is the thing about hope, Salis. It's heavy. When you haven't carried it for 20 years, it's enough to crush you. We're just here to help them hold the weight until they're strong enough to carry it themselves." The weeks turned into months, and the transformation of the Nareth system became a permanent fixture in the galactic maps. The Human Neutrality Compact didn't just maintain a presence, they built a foundation. Bastion Kepri was no longer a lone fortress. It was the capital of a growing alliance. The Draxon Ascendancy had made several attempts to harass the outer sensor nets, but each time they had been met by the Resolute Black and its sister ships. The humans didn't fight with the cold efficiency of machines. They fought with the relentless protective fury of a species that had decided, once and for all, that the era of preservation processing was over. On the one-year anniversary of the first signal, a ceremony was held in the central plaza. It wasn't a military parade or a display of conquered banners. It was a gathering of people. Commander Salis Van stood before the crowd, her wings groomed and her new cloak bearing both the Illyri crest and the human star. She looked out at the faces, Illyri, human, Kalo, and a dozen other species who had heard the call and decided to seek sanctuary. "A year ago," Salis began, her voice projected across every deck of the station, "this fortress was a grave. We were told that our lives were statistically insignificant. We were told that the universe had no memory for decency. We believed those lies because we were alone." She paused, her eyes finding Captain Hale in the front row. He wasn't on the stage. He was standing with his crew, a cup of that dark, aggressive coffee in his hand, looking like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. "But then," Salis continued, "we sent a message. We reached into the dark and asked if anyone was still listening. And the answer didn't come in the form of a decree or a contract. It came in the form of a ship that refused to let us die. Today, we don't celebrate a victory over an enemy. We celebrate the end of the silence. We celebrate the fact that when we called, the universe, in its most stubborn, courageous, and human form, answered back." The cheering that followed was a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Bastion. It was the sound of a galaxy waking up. After the ceremony, Salis found Hale at the edge of the observation deck, looking out at the Resolute Black. The ship was no longer scarred and bleeding, its hull was polished, and its dorsal fins had been rebuilt, stronger than before. It sat anchored to the station, a silent guardian in the dark. "So," Salis said, stepping up to the rail, "what's the next obsolete doctrine we're going to revive?" Hale turned, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "I was thinking about the old frontier medical outreach. Apparently, there's a Sector 3 jumps from here that hasn't seen a doctor in 50 years. They've been sending signals for a decade, but nobody's bothered to check them out." Salis looked at the tactical map on her wristcom. The sector was deep in the grey zones, far from the established trade routes. It was dangerous, isolated, and completely illogical to visit. "It sounds like a terrible idea," she said. Hale raised his cup. "The worst. We leave at 800 hours. Salis laughed, a sound that carried no trace of the fear she had felt during the siege. She looked at her station, her people, and the human ship that had changed everything. The void was still vast, and the shadows were still long, but the darkness was no longer a wall. It was just a space between lights. "I'll have my pilots ready," Salis said, turning back toward the command well. "After all, we wouldn't want the universe to think we stopped listening." As the sun of Narath disappeared behind the horizon, the lights of Bastion Kepri flared to life, matching the stars one for one. In the cold, silent gallery of the cosmos, a new signal was being sent, not a cry for help, but a declaration of presence. The humans and the Illyri, the Kylo and the Resolute, they were all part of the same story now. A story that began with a click of a brass key and ended with a galaxy that finally knew how to answer.